to our Substack Live. I'm Matt Lewis. I'm here with Chris Cillizza, Substack, I don't know, maniac, master.
That maniac is an appropriate term, yes.
Veteran journalist, formerly of CNN and the Washington Post, Chris Cillizza. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks, man. I'm happy to do it. Always. I find these things to be like one of my favorite things that I do.
Me too. I love it. It's
communal. Easy, it's fun. I learn stuff. I get ideas. I find it all good.
Me too. And we have no lack of material today. And let's start.
Correct.
Let's start. Is today the 100th day of Trump?
It's today.
I should have marketed this for that.
Only 13 more 100-day blocks to go.
Well, you have, at least I saw on your Substack, you have questioned, is this the worst 100 days in history? So I'll just throw it to you.
So Chuck Todd and I, formerly of NBC News, do a podcast every Monday for Substack where we just kind of honestly shoot the shit. And he said he thinks this is the worst 100 days from sort of a political perspective that we've ever had. And you know what? I think he said any modern day presidency. So I always define modern day as post-World War II. So let's see. I would say Donald Trump started his second term with better poll numbers than he did his first term. They weren't amazing. They were 51, 52, 53% approval. But compared to where he started the first term, which was like 47%, they were better. He has rapidly eroded that goodwill to the extent it existed. He's now at or below where any past president has been after this period in his presidency. Does that make it the worst 100 days ever? I think Chuck was talking about a combination of his polling, which is bad, and sort of what he's done on tariffs, on DOGE, on sort of the 137 executive orders and 5 laws passed or signed, right? I think Chuck's criticism was more on the approach and a little bit on the polling. I would just say, I always kind of just leave the data to speak for itself. If you believe the data, he is at the lowest ebb of any president in terms of job approval after 100 days, with the possible exception of Donald Trump in 2017. So he's competing with himself there. So, it's 100 days. It's a made up thing. I think it's important to note that, right? It is not like people are like, what do the polls say about Abraham Lincoln's first 100 days, right? This is a made up thing.
This is an FDR invented.
FDR, right? Exactly. And so it's a conceit, but there are lots and lots more 100-day blocks to go. This has not started the way Donald Trump would have wanted it to start. No matter what he says, that is true. He did not want to be at the low 40s in job approval right now with having to suspend the tariffs and in this trade war with China and the Ukraine-Russia war still going on, and no Iran ceasefire deal. Do you know what I mean? There hasn't been a big accomplishment short of border crossings are down, which I do think he deserves some credit for, though I will note they were headed downward when Joe Biden was at the end of Joe Biden's presidency. So it's not where he wants to be. At the same time, it's 3 months, and it's a 4-year term.
But I think it's, who knows? We see through a glass darkly, but it seems likely that the policies that Trump has put in place that have proven thus far to be unpopular are likely to metastasize, and that he has laid the groundwork for these trends to continue. And so who knows, right? Nobody knows what the future may hold, but it seems likely to me that he may be at his peak right now. It might be like Joe Biden. Joe Biden's Afghanistan withdrawal moment happened in the summer of 2021, never got back above 50%. Yep. This could be Trump beat him to it in 100 days.
So 2 thoughts on that. One, I think a lot of the answer to that question is, how badly did he hurt himself with the tariff stuff, right? How recoverable or not recoverable in terms of public opinion and public approval is the tariff stuff, right? My guess is they find some way to make a deal with China. At some point, they're going to announce a bunch of deals with these other countries. These tariffs, these onerous tariffs that he put in place on Liberation Day, are never going to go back into effect. But to your point about Afghanistan and Biden, I think that's a useful comp, which is like Biden never really recovers from that. You know what I mean? I don't think that people like at the end of the in September of 2023 were like Joe Biden in Afghanistan, but I think it had damaged him on a core competency, right? Afghanistan, like foreign policy. If Joe Biden knew anything, it was that, ostensibly. And so I think it eroded trust in him across the board. And there is that comparison to be made, I think, with Trump, which is like the reason he was elected, plain and simple, was the economy, right? I mean, there's lots of other things, but the big reason was the economy. I always say 1 in 3 voters said the economy was the most important issue in their vote, in deciding their vote in the exit polling. Of that 1/3, Trump won 81%. Harris won 18%. So it's like, if that core competency, which is the economy, he's a business guy, knows what he's doing, if that erodes out, it's possible that it is Biden's Afghanistan all over again, that there isn't a way that Trump recovers. Even if the tariff stuff goes away in people's top of mind, they're still like they just don't have confidence and they may not be able to pinpoint it. The other point I'll make is, to me, when I think about what could change things, like about Trump's current trajectory, the only thing I can think of is like a major external event. Chuck, Todd, and I were talking about this yesterday because we were sort of mulling this same question, like what can change it? And Chuck made a really good point. He's like, look, Bill Clinton, 92 to 94, not popular, 94 elections, a total disaster for the Democratic Party. And then the Oklahoma City bombing happens in 1995. Mm-hmm. And that reorients, he is seen as having handled it in an empathetic and good way. And that kind of reorients people to his presidency. The issue is you can never predict major external events, number one. And number two, I'm not sure that Trump is empathetic enough and capable enough as kind of a leader to handle, I mean, God forbid we have another Oklahoma City-like event. I don't know that he would be equipped to handle it in a way that would accrue to his benefit among people who are not already for him.
Right.
So that may...
we had a test. It was called COVID-19.
Yeah.
And he didn't pass that one, right?
He did not. You're exactly right. That would bode poorly for the major external event, because a global once in 100 years pandemic definitely qualifies.
And one could imagine a politician, dare say an authoritarian type politician, becoming more popular in the midst of such a crisis, and yet Trump didn't do it, which leads me to, I think, an interesting paradox, which is this. On one hand, Donald Trump does, and this is for our listeners or viewers who are concerned about Trump's authoritarian tendencies. Mm-hmm. On one hand, I mean, man, he is going down this checklist of intimidating and co-opting military,
law
police,
firms,
judges, law firms, media, you name it, right? On the other hand, he has really botched his popularity in a way that I think if you had this master plan, you might not be so incompetent. You might want to make the trains run on time. And so maybe if there's a silver lining to all of this, it could be that Trump's incompetence is the thing that prevents him from executing a master plan.
And I mean, I hate, candidly, I'm against the Donald Trump is Hitler or America's Hitler thing. I just think it's too facile. I don't like comparisons to Nazi Germany in general. I think it demeans what happened, but whatever. But I'm in the midst of reading this really long book on Hitler. And Hitler was extremely popular once he came into power. I mean, people are like, we do need to make Germany great again. My words, obviously not Hitler's. But so it's kind of like there isn't this public rising up behind him. And but by the way, yes, of course, Hitler was popular because he intimidated everyone, and the SS would go out and beat the shit out of people on the streets. And yes, I mean, all of those things are true. But 40% of the public approves of Donald Trump right now, and that's. I think that's it may be the best argument against him turning us into an authoritarian state. It's also just on a more like macro nuts and bolts political level. I also think it makes it harder for him to get what he wants. Like, I'm stunned that they did, you didn't ask about this, but I'm stunned that they did the tariff thing first, and then they're going to do the tax cut and the one big beautiful bill and all that. It seems to me idiotic to do that just from a political standpoint. Give them the candy first. Send out the checks that have like a tax cut.
Right.
Give the Republican Party and elected officials what they want. Then do the hard thing. Don't do the hard thing first.
That's the thing. I mean, again, Trump does seem to be executing this checklist of how to be an authoritarian very adeptly in some ways. But on the other hand, if I wanted to be a demagogic populist leader, I would give people stuff.
Totally.
Doge is the opposite. And so I feel like there's a sort of incoherence at play here. Like, you've got the Freedom Caucus people telling him to cut budgets. You've got Elon Musk telling him this, to make government more efficient. But then you've got Trump's instincts, which are to buy people off.
Yep.
So, and look, there were two things
to be bought off. I mean, I really do think like if you need to understand the lens of the first 100 days and really the first 4 years, it's a kleptocracy. I mean, it's just transactional. It's just what can you give me? What can I get that I can then declare victory on or is good for me? I mean, I always go back to the first Canada tariffs. Canada, I know we're going to talk about the Canadian election, but Canada is on my mind today, which I don't say every day, but sorry, Canada. But, the first tariffs, he pauses them. Why does he pause them? Because he says Canada capitulated to us because we have leverage. What did Canada give them? Justin Trudeau was the prime minister at the time, named a fentanyl czar. Come on, man. Like, yeah, I mean, like, do you think that Justin Trudeau was sitting there and he was like, you know what? We're going to have to do it. We're going to have to exercise the nuclear option. We're going to have to give him the fentanyl czar. I mean, I'm not trying to downplay fentanyl. It's obviously a massive problem in this country and Canada across the world. But my point is like, fentanyl czar, naming someone to be head of something is not exactly like a massive concession. But Trudeau understood, you got to give him something. Yeah. You got to give him something, whether it's monetary or not. Look, I think this law firm thing should be a way bigger deal. They're just giving hundreds of millions of dollars in pro bono work, basically to buy him off. I mean, it doesn't seem to me to be complicated, and yet that's what it is. I mean, I always think it's always about, is this good for Donald Trump? People who overthink it, it's your 9-year-old is complaining he wants a piece of candy. Do you choose to give him a piece of candy or not?
Yeah. But my point would be, a truly devious mastermind would not be so gullible or susceptible to flattery or being bought off, right? Yes. And that person would be really hard to stop if they had the other sort of qualities that Trump had 100 days ago.
And they would, well, and the other thing too is they probably wouldn't do everything in public. I mean, he does everything. He extorts these law firms publicly. Via social.
Totally.
There's no artifice. I mean, and in some ways, I find that comforting. In that it's like, I guess people would say, well, you should imagine what he's doing behind the scenes, but I'm not convinced he's doing all that. He's such a public actor, and he kind of always has been. He wants to do it in public. I was thinking of this with the Atlantic interview. Like, he wants to meet Jeff Goldberg. He says this in the transcript of the interview. Because basically he now views Goldberg, who posted the worst story for Donald Trump's first 100 days, he now views him as sort of an equal. And he knows that it will get eyeballs. He doesn't want to meet with Goldberg secretly. He says it out loud. He puts it on social. Should be interesting. Like, there's no secret blueprint on the wall of the Oval Office that he's operating against. He says in that Atlantic interview, I'm paraphrasing, but barely, he says, I kind of just do and say whatever comes to mind. I think that's 100% accurate.
Yes. He's an honest liar, as Dave Chappelle said.
Right. By the way, comedians, Chappelle, very much at the top of this. But somebody told me this 6 months ago, and I thought it was so smart. They said, listen to comedians analyze Trump. They do the best job of it. They understand his mentality. And I think it's totally true. I need to write about that, but I think it's totally 100% true.
Totally. And they're among our best political commentators and podcasters today.
Yep.
One thing about doing it publicly, though, I think there's an added benefit, which is if you do something publicly, in a way, it's like, that wasn't illegal. I told Russia to look up her emails in front of cameras. I wasn't trying to hide it. Obviously, I think people think if you do something brazenly in public, that it can't be wrong or illegal, because if it were, you would have been ashamed of it and you would have tried to hide it.
Yep.
It's I think that's exactly right. Jedi mind trick.
He has used that explanation. I remember it was during the Philadelphia Republican convention. He 2016. He held the press conference. I remember because I remember two things about that. It was hot as hell in Philadelphia, and I had gotten sick in Minneapolis or wherever the hell the Democratic one was, and I was so sick, and I was like watching it, and I was like, did I hear that right? And he basically said like, well, Russia, if you're listening, find her emails. Yeah, there is absolutely a piece of that. You know what goes hand in hand with that? I would sit in focus groups sometimes. This is 2016. Washington Post would do polling. I sit in a focus group and like people would say he must be honest because no politician would ever say the kinds of things he says in public. I mean, it's fascinating.
Yep.
Because like, what are you saying many times? And by the way, in the Atlantic interview, he says, "I'm a very honest guy." What he is saying is demonstrably false. I mean, it's easily proven false, right? But people somehow believe it because it's outlandish and because, to your point, he says it out loud.
Yeah.
It's
No, I
so
think you're
weird.
right. I think they conflate being rude and blunt with being honest, and
Yes. Yep.
it is an interesting thing. So you mentioned that Atlantic interview.
Yes.
What else? I know you did a Substack post. What else jumped out at you?
He's he, I mean, there's nothing huge in there news wise other than I didn't know this. It's possible it was out there, but he says he like he had a talking to with Pete Hegseth, basically, and that it's going to be better. But the overarching thing, and this to me is like such an important point about Trump. He's like very solicitous of Jeff Goldberg as well as Ashley Parker and Michael Shear, the three reporters from The Atlantic who do the interview. Like, he's very familiar with it's obvious from the back and forth. He's very interested and familiar with their work. He wants to impress them. The beginning of the interview is him saying, like, see all this stuff in the Oval Office? I brought all this in. It was all in the vaults. Do you like it? And then at one point, Carolyn Levitt's in the room, and Goldberg says, like, the White House press secretary, and Goldberg says, she's been really hard on me. And Trump stops the interview. He's like, do you guys like Carolyn? What do you think of Carolyn? Like, and this to me is like the great misunderstanding that a lot of the MAGA people have about Trump. So obviously he says fake news all the time, blah, 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 blah. And like, if you've ever been to a Trump rally, as I have, and I'm sure you probably have, like, if you go there and people know you're a reporter, they're like, you know what I mean? And they yell at you. And I always want to say to them, like, look, man, like, he doesn't believe any of that stuff. He just says it because you cheered for it. Donald Trump cares deeply about the media's opinion of him. He follows the media and journalism really, really closely. He always has. He has a very keen understanding of the sort of parasitic relationship between the media and the president. Much more so, George W. Bush and Barack Obama were actually genuinely disdainful of the media. They didn't totally understand why they needed it. They thought reporters were dumbasses. They thought they were, know-it-alls. Trump doesn't have he doesn't harbor any of those views about the media. I know what he says publicly, but and if you read the transcript of that interview, which I would urge people to do, or you go to my Substack and read my lines from it, what comes out of it in the 50,000-foot view is this is a guy who wants Jeff Goldberg to like him, to respect him, which is totally fascinating. But again, if you know who he really is, you would not be surprised by it.
So we teased the Canadian elections. And well, let's just start. What was your take on the Liberal victory?
It is, I urge people, the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting, has been doing like a Nate Silver-like tracking of polling averages for the last year. Just go and look at January 1, 2025, where the Liberal Party support was and where the Conservative Party support was. And then go look at April 25th, 3 days before the election. The crossing of the streams, to borrow a Ghostbusters reference, is absolutely, I've not seen it before, especially because neither Mark Carney, nor the Liberal Party nominee, nor Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative Party nominee, did all that much. To be told, like, Mark Carney is like a giant technocrat nerd. He was the head of the Bank of Canada. He was the head of the Bank of England. And Pierre Poilievre is just like a conservative for Canada conservative, right? What changed was Donald Trump comes into office. He says Canada should be the 51st state. He calls Justin Trudeau governor. He puts these tariffs in place, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like that whether wittingly or unwittingly, he changed the course of Canadian politics. Yeah. It's stunning.
And what's interesting, I listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of videos, and a lot of YouTube. Jonah Goldberg has been on this jag lately, which I find very interesting. He's talking about honor And what Jonah says is that from a logical standpoint, Trump may have a point. Canada, your average Canadian might actually become richer if they
Yep.
join the United States. But guess
Yep.
what? They don't like being told what to do. They
No.
don't like losing their culture or their identity. Um, and you would think that that's something that Trump might understand, but I'm not sure he does. I'm not sure he gets. I mean, think of it. People go to war and die for irrational, I'm using scare quotes here, or
Yep.
quotes, irrational things like honor, love, things that I'm not sure Donald Trump fully understands. And so when he makes fun of Canada, when he threatens to quote, annex them, if they're not thinking rationally, like, well,
No.
maybe we could make a little more money if we, they're thinking like, this is someone coming into my, why do we get fired up as an Orioles fan, when the Yankees fans come to Camden Yards
Yep.
into our house
Yep.
and try to beat us
Of
there?
course.
There are things more important than money. I'm not sure he understands or fully appreciates that, which is weird for a nationalist who, his people, his MAGA folks are tapping into some like weird historic, stuff that has to do with deep-seated beliefs and values. I'm not sure he gets it.
I don't think he does, which is weird, right? Because like the worst thing in to call Donald Trump is one of two: less rich or poor than he says he is, or weak. And so when you effectively sort of bully a country and treat them as a vassal state and be like, they don't really exist except for us, of course they're going to resent that. Of course they're not going to look at the hard. I think it's what you're capturing is the heart versus head.
Yeah.
Right? The head argument, it's like, okay, just to take a non-Canada example, Greenland might do better to have closer relations with the United States. Same is true for Denmark. I think that makes some intellectual sense. But no one wants to be told, well, either you do it or we'll just take you over. Like, that's not how any country wants to be treated. And it is weird though, because it's like, he of all people should understand that, because he never wants to be treated as lesser than, right? He never wants to be treated as a second-class citizen. I think that's what's fueled, I think resentment and a sense of victimhood has fueled his whole life, but especially his political career. These people are laughing at me in Washington. I'll show them. And yet he doesn't seem to understand the sort of transitive property. Like if A equals B, if you don't like being treated that way, well, then you treating Canada or Greenland or Denmark that way, they're not going to like it either. He doesn't. But I also think some of that is he's not big on putting himself in other people's shoes.
No empathy. And I also
like
think
that's not. It's kind of like he sees the world through his lens, always has, always will, and that's it. Like I don't even think he's interested in putting himself in other people's shoes.
Definitely. So what I'm curious about is, right, we've seen these trends globally where people are trending toward authoritarianism, sort of right-wing nationalism. But Canada maybe has bucked that trend. And I'm wondering if this is a harbinger of things to come, a backlash both internationally and domestically. We're looking at Virginia having elections. Now, obviously, the beef of Virginians is very different than the beef of Canadians, but the Trump effect would be the consistent thing.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, I don't think Trump started the rise of nationalist populism in the world, but there's, I mean, it certainly is. If you look between 2016 and 2025, one of the stories globally is that, right? The make fill in the blank country great again movement is on the march at some level through the 2024 election. I'm super interested in that question too, and especially in the figure of Mark Carney. Like Mark Carney is Bank of England, Bank of Canada, total technocrat, sort of bureaucrat, right? Like not the kind of person. I don't know if people are watching or listening have ever seen him speak, but he's not the like overwhelming. He's not Bill Clinton, right? He's not Barack Obama. He's not even George W. Bush in terms of charisma and I feel your pain. But I wonder if one of the, again, unforeseen and unplanned effects by Donald Trump, but effects of what Donald Trump has done over his first 100 days does there become a desire for somebody who's just really good at managing complex financial and economic situations for countries? Because that's what Carney's expertise is, right? It's kind of like he's not like out on the stump all the time, but he does know how to manage difficult financial situations, which inarguably is what the world is facing right now as Trump tries to kind of wrench the world economy, or at least America's economy, back to like, we're going to make things here and manufacturing is going to rise again. I wonder if Carney, maybe he's just an anomaly, right, created by Trump and his attitude and rhetoric to Canada. But I do wonder if, in elections in 2025, as well as kind of 2026, is there a like, okay, let's just go for expertise, right, as opposed to flash? I mean, every election has some level of either copycat or revulsion, right? You're either copying what happened or you're reacting against what happened. And Carney is clearly a reaction to Trump. And I'm interested to see, I think New Jersey's probably too Democratic for it to be the governor's race to be a real barometer. Virginia leans Democratic, but if Abigail Spanberger wins by 10 points in November, I think that's a real message.
Yeah. And the Dems could also run the table, lieutenant governor, attorney general.
Yep.
That would definitely send a signal, and
Absolutely.
it wouldn't surprise me. All right, let's shift gears. I want to talk to you about the Democrats a little bit. I want to talk about the media.
Yep.
And the story converges with Joe Biden's age. I saw Chuck Todd on your Substack the other day, really calling out members of the media at the White House Correspondents' Dinner for sort of self-flagellating themselves over not doing a better job of covering Biden's age and talking about it. This seems to be the kind of story where the right is using it as a cudgel now to criticize everybody. But what is your take on looking back on the postmortem of this story?
So Chuck and I went back a little bit yesterday on this because I'm not as critical of the folks who are coming out. I get his logic, right? Chuck's thinking is these people are virtue signaling to try to get in good with Trump by saying, "Man, we really screwed up the Joe Biden story." I totally understand that, and it would not be beyond reporters to be that Machiavellian, certainly. But my basic take is a couplefold. One, I do think it was a cover-up. And I think Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson's book, which comes out in a month, less than a month, May 20th, is going to show, from what I have heard, is going to show in a pretty declarative way that people in the Biden inner circle knew the situation. And they actively kept him from the media, kept him from public appearances. And we only learned it really on June 27th in the debate. But that was far from the only time that he had shown signs that he was debilitating or eroding. So I do think there was a cover up there. What I don't think, and I wonder what you think of this. What I don't think is, when I think of a media cover up, because I think when the right now says it was a cover up, they lump Democrats and the media in together. Democrats and the media were in cahoots. They all knew Biden was in bad shape, and no one said anything because they wanted him to win. I think that is true of the Biden inner circle based on the reporting that I have and the reporting that I know about. Okay. I don't think this was a media cover-up in the same way that the media covering John F. Kennedy knew he was catting around on Jackie, knew he was in far worse health than his public image. And they did kind of say, like, well, we're going to keep this to ourselves. Like, there was an active complicit, like, we're going to keep this to themselves, many of which was because they were friends with JFK, friendly. I don't think this is that. Like, to me, the bar has to be pretty high to say the president of the United States is in active mental decline. He has Parkinson's. He has dementia, which the right, lobbed at Joe Biden all the time. It's like, you can say that all you want, but I don't think you can, a media outlet, a credible media outlet can report that unless you've seen a medical diagnosis, right? Yes, my eyes and ears told me Joe Biden is too old to run again. And I tried to write about that. I have said publicly I should have asked more questions. And I can't blame this on the mainstream media because I was already gone from CNN by this point. This was me. I should have pushed harder on, okay, well, you say he's fine, but like, why isn't he doing more media appearances? Why isn't he doing the Super Bowl interview? Whatever. I was cowed somewhat by the response, which was always the response by the Biden White House, which is, you're an ageist. This is unfair. You just don't like him because he's old, right? And I was cowed more than I should have been by that. But I don't think this was like everyone in the media knew Joe Biden was declining and hid it because they wanted Donald Trump not to win. I don't see evidence of that. Do I think that the media writ large was more willing to give was more willing to accept he's fine. He has more energy than 20-year-olds behind the scenes. Were they more willing to accept that than they would have been if Donald Trump was in the exact same situation? Yes. Why? Because more journalists are Democrats than Republicans. Like, I don't know why we pretend that's not true. And so, yeah, I think they were more willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Also, Joe Biden's track record was not as spotty as Donald Trump's track record of telling the truth ain't great. Joe Biden's track record of telling the truth broadly was fine, especially when compared to Donald Trump. But yes, I think the fact that there are more Democrats than Republicans in the media, they were more willing to kind of let that answer stand and not be more critical. That's a long answer to your question. I've thought a lot about it, though. I think it's really important. I think Democrats who say, like, who cares? Old news, move on. It's like, dude, if the shoe was on the other foot, and we were talking about a Republican administration cover up, Reagan-esque of his condition, you'd want congressional investigations and books written. You would not be like, well, I mean, Donald Trump's not president anymore. Let's move on. Like, good for the goose, good for the gander, man. I just wish more people were more intellectually honest about that stuff.
I don't want to spend too much time media navel gazing, but while we're on the topic, I want to ask you, like, I feel like it's important to have an adversarial relationship where the press should have an adversarial relationship with people in power, politicians, just like you want, the prosecutor and the defense attorney to be adversarial. And it doesn't mean that you're mean. It doesn't mean that you hate each other, but this system needs that. And we're seeing this administration, this White House bringing in, and look, I started off as a blogger. You and I are talking to each other on Substack. So we're not like, old school purists or anything like that. But it seems like this administration is bringing in a bunch of basically hacks and yes men and calling them the press corps. And I just wonder where it's going to end, because I suspect we haven't seen the low point yet.
Yeah. And, I try to avoid just blaming Donald Trump for everything. And the truth of the matter is, like, when Barack Obama was president, Huffington Post, which was, more relevant back then, they got questions in White House press briefings. And they were, Joe Biden would go on podcasts and other things that were clearly Democratic leaning. Kamala Harris's great mistake of saying, I wouldn't do anything different than Joe Biden, came on The View, which is a very Democratic friendly thing. So these things have existed. And as technology has sort of fostered a zillion different platforms, there are more ways, more people, more outlets that are just purely partisan. Is it hard for me when I listen to the White House press briefing to hear questions from some of these outlets? Like, one last week, I was like, President Trump is remarkably healthy. What do you attribute that to? Like, yes, of course. I mean, I'm not a believer in the left, or I do not like partisan media. I think on the left and the right, I think it is bad.
But you wouldn't. I'm sure you wouldn't equate like Sam Stein or John Ward of the Huffington Post with what we're seeing today. With Trump. It's obvious. I get your point that this has been a long time coming, but I think that it's
it's exponentially more ridiculous now. No, the Huffington Post, while they were left-leaning, they had real reporters like Sam and John who were asking hard, serious questions because they wanted to be taken seriously as reporters. These people don't have any interest in that. Their interest is in access to Trump, because that is financially lucrative to them. And the way that they get access and maintain access to Trump is to kiss his ass. I mean, it's not complicated. I don't know. I don't have any good answers of where the future of journalism goes and by good answers, I mean answers that leave me with any sense of optimism. I can see how people like you and I could succeed and make a living. I struggle to see the future for like a Washington Post. I just think it's not going to go away. It's going to exist, but its ability to be an independent ball and strike caller that is also financially viable, I think is extremely difficult.
Okay,
and I spent 10 years there and root for them and still know tons of people there.
So you and I are on Substack. Every day, somebody leaves the mainstream media and gets in our space. And you're one of them. Some people could say I'm one of them, but it's tough, right? You're out here, let's say you're a guerrilla Hammond Egger. You're trying to like build a social media presence, and next thing you know, Jim Acosta is like hosting, lives competing with yours. It's hard to compete with that. Do you believe that, like, does a rising tide lift all boats? And this is, or are they bigfooting us here,
I
Chris?
think a rising tide lifts all boats. I think when I started writing on Substack 2 years ago, I had to explain to people what Substack was. They were like, "Is that a website?" Or and now I have to much less. There's definitely still people where they're like, "Hey man, are you still at CNN?" And I'm like, "No, that was 2 years ago." Like now I'm at Substack. And they're like, "Substack, what is it? Is it a private company?" So there is still some of that, but the bar of people knowing what it is, it's so many more people now know what it is. So I do think it's generally speaking a rising tide lifts all boats. I will say this. Um, I think there is a misconception among people in the legacy media, many of whom I talk to who reach out to me and they're like, "Hey, what's the deal with Substack?" Because they know legacy media is fading. Certainly, if you're a well-paid journalist at a legacy media place, you should absolutely start looking for another job. I learned that one the hard way. Uh, the I think what I always tell them is, look, Substack is not a money tree in your yard. People like Acosta, who are number one, really high profile, right? TV,
Yeah.
but also positioned as anti-Trump and anti-big media. CNN basically said, like, we don't really want you anymore. That's a really good, and by good I mean easily monetizable model for Substack.
And then he hustles. He works super hard.
He does
too. He's not just phoning it in.
Same thing with Jen Rubin and Norma Eisen at the Contrarian. Same thing. Anti-Washington Post, sort of big media, also anti-Trump. I say if you want to go out and be sort of a ball and strike caller, little less predictably partisan, don't assume that you're just going to sort of start making seven figures. Like, it is a crowded space. And to your point about Jim, you have to work it. Like, I write a lot every day. I make a YouTube video every single day. I make a lot of content. I reach out to people. I try to do Substack Live. It's not a career capper. It's not like, well, I'll just sit back and let the subscriptions roll in. For most of us, right? And I think that's the biggest misconception is I think people think, well, I'll just go and get rich on Substack if this mainstream media thing doesn't work out. That is not the case. That said, the more familiar people get with Substack and YouTube as places where there can be independent political content, like you don't have to work for one of these big companies, I think that's the better for all of us. Even the gorilla ham and egger, I just think more eyeballs broadly is a good thing.
All right, I'm going to get you out of here on this.
Okay.
I've appreciated you have been doing what I will call wildly premature looks at 2028, where
I would call them the same thing.
Doing rankings, and I appreciate that because I think it's a fun place for us to end.
Yes, man.
Let's start with the Republican side.
Yeah.
Let's assume Donald Trump will not be the nominee.
Yes, I always say you have to assume that, though I'm not certain of that. I will note in that Atlantic interview, he is directly asked about running in 2028. And the answer he gives is he could say, I'm not running. Under no circumstance will I run. He does not give that answer. But yes, let's put that aside. To me, the top tier is 2.5 people. JD Vance, Donald Trump Jr., and the half where I could see him being second tier, but I wound up putting him first tier is Glenn Youngkin. Just because it's like, well, if you don't want a Vance, Don Jr. type, maybe there's this guy who's kind of MAGA adjacent, but could bring in the establishment. I still think if I was betting, it would be Don Jr. or JD Vance. For anyone who's ever been to a Trump rally, the person who gets the biggest applause other than Donald Trump Sr. is Donald Trump Jr. I think he wants to run for something. I don't know if it's president. I think he and Vance are actual friends, and that would create, because Vance is running, obviously, and I think that would create some tension. But those to me are, because I think it's Trumpism all the way down at this point.
Yeah, me too.
Party. I don't think Nikki Haley is going to be a serious candidate this time around. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see any evidence that Trump is losing his grip on the Republican Party. Now, maybe, look, it's in 2028 and it's April 2025. Maybe by then he will have, and there'll be this huge backlash, and then Nikki Haley becomes more relevant, or people like her. But right now, it's just not the case.
I totally agree, which is why I get what you're doing with Youngkin. I think it's a hedge.
Yes, it totally is a hedge.
But I would actually say, I think you're right. It's JD Vance, it's Donald Trump Jr., but then I think it's Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Charlie Kirk. Like, I think there's
someone in that space.
A lot of people before I would get to Glenn Youngkin. But
I mean, I do think today Donald Trump has more control and loyalty in the Republican Party than ever before. And I know that's kind of a weird thing to say because he's at like 42% approval.
Yeah.
But in terms of people willing to cross him publicly, There just isn't anyone. And until there is someone who does not pay a major penalty for it, we always point out the only person who's ever really done it is Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia. Trump tried to beat Kemp after Kemp refused to say that Trump won Georgia in 2020, and Kemp won. But there's one of him, and there's a lot of Mitt Romney and Liz Cheney and Jeff Flake, and you know what I mean, and a zillion, Adam Kinzinger, a zillion other people we can name. So unless that changes, I'm skeptical.
I totally agree. How about the Dems, 2028?
Bigger field. I think they will have a bigger field no matter what, because I think the party doesn't really know what it wants to be. I mean, I think any Democrat who tells you the Democratic Party knows what it wants to be is bullshitting you at this point. So I think there are people who will definitely run, which are like J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, Pete Buttigieg, former transportation secretary. And then, to me, the most, and I think they will all run, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, I think they will all run serious campaigns. To me, the most interesting person in the party right now is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Bernie Sanders is not going to run for president again. I don't think he's like 84 or something right now. But that, what was it called? Fighting Oligarchy tour that they did, I don't think it's the solution, because the 30,000 people who show up are 30,000 people going to vote for any Democratic nominee against any Republican nominee in 2028. But I think there is energy there. I think she is very skillful. We were talking about, Chuck and I were talking about AOC, I think, last week, and he used the phrase, a really good natural political athlete. I think that's true of her. Yeah. Now, just being a good natural athlete does not mean that you are a star in the NBA, right? You got to also work hard. But she has a lot of natural ability. Is she a good nominee for the Democratic Party? I'm less certain of that, given who we know they need to win over. In the long run, but she to me is the most interesting person, and honestly, I think she probably does run for president, because if there are polls out there, and there are, that even at this point show you kind of in second or third place behind Kamala Harris, who to me should not run, but even if she runs, won't win. How do you not do it? Do you know what I mean? How do you look at that and say, Kamala Harris is at 32 and I'm at 21, and I haven't spent any money, and I'm a member of Congress from New York? Why would you not run? Your ceiling is high enough that you could be the nominee.
I like Fetterman, AOC.
I think Fetterman would be really interesting. One question I have about Fetterman, and I don't know how to, this is hard, but I don't know if his auditory stuff caused by the stroke, if it will allow him to do the sorts of things that would be required. He definitely has gotten to a place where he can give interviews and he can speak on the floor. I just don't know. I mean, I'm obviously not a doctor. I'm not monitoring him every day, but that's the question I have with him. I think he's a very interesting voice too.
If he hadn't had
he
that
and AOC,
stroke.
I think, are the two most interesting voices right now in the party.
Totally agree. All right, Chris Cillizza, final thoughts? Anything you want to plug? Anything I missed?
No, just check out our Substacks. I know for me, I give about 65% of the content away, 35% you got to pay for. My YouTube is entirely free. I just went over 70,000 subscribers. It's just youtube.com/Chris Cillizza. Just check it out, man. I think it'll be fun. I think you'll like it. And my YouTube especially is worth what you pay for it. Absolutely free.
Well, I'm a fan, I'm a reader, and I love the videos that you
Thank you, my friend. I'm trying. I think you got to hustle. That's one thing about the independent media world. You got to hustle. You can't, there is no resting on your laurels. The flattening of the media landscape is a good thing, but having worked at CNN and the Washington Post and having been on TV doesn't give me any particular edge. You got to go out there and show people why me, why us, and why now.
Amen. Thank you, everybody, for watching us. And Chris Cillizza, thanks for coming on.
Thank you all. Everyone take care. Have a good day. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks.